I'm Christina and welcome to Breaking Out of Breaking In, a practical filmmaking podcast about taking your creative career into your own hands and making great work that gets seen without playing the Hollywood game.
Or at least while changing the rules. Hi, I'm Bri Castellini, your other co-host, and today we are breaking down directing. If you'd like to suggest a new topic, send us a compliment, ask us a question, or otherwise get in touch, you can hit us up on Twitter or Instagram at BreakingOutPod, or via email, breakingoutofbreakinginpod@gmail.com. And if you want deeper dives into everything we cover on this podcast, subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/breakingoutpod. For just $3 a month, you'll get bonus content like templates, curated learnings, and custom infographics. For $5 a month, you'll get a holographic logo sticker, and for $10 a month, you'll get that, the sticker, and a shout out at the end of every episode because you are one of our VIPs. So I feel like we should, before we even jump into it, contextualize that we're recording this in February, but I don't think you guys are hearing us until May.
Yeah.
Yeah, May 6th. It is May 6th. Hello from the past, everyone.
Okay, so directing.
Yeah.
It's a big subject.
Christina, when did you realize that you liked directing? Because I think both of us have talked previously on this podcast about how we both very much consider ourselves writers first, and primarily as writers. But yeah, when was directing added to your oeuvre?
So I should actually say when I was a kid, I wanted to be an actor because I didn't know what a director was. I knew that there was writers and then there were people on screen. I think, I'm talking very, very young. But I was always writing and I loved movies in general. And then when I was 11, I was in a play in the musical version of Annie. And I was just an orphan and I really hated singing. And the teacher who was the director forced me to sing. And she kept making people do things that they didn't want to do just for the overall show and her vision. And I realized when I was sort of being forced to sing when I didn't want to that I did not want to act. And I, in fact, wanted to direct, but not because I wanted to be bossy the way that I felt she was, but because I felt like I could do it better than her. And so
How old are you?
I was
What
11.
age? Wow. I love that.
But I didn't actually realize that I love directing until I would say probably I made this short called SKA, which stands for Serial Killers Anonymous, and it was before Summit. It was the very last short I made before I made Summit. And everything else I had made before that, I was really just figuring it out. I didn't yet know how to talk to actors. And on Do-Over, which we talked about in First Projects, I had this one actor who was really just horrible because he kept going big with his performance, basically shouting it and just being very over the top. And he was a theater actor. And I kept trying to give him notes to kind of bring it down. And then he would take everything I said very personally and then got very angry and stormed off, so I had to recast him. And so I was maybe I don't like directing. But after kind of going through a few shorts with a few different actors and getting feedback and seeing what was working and finding a kind of groove, I made SKA, and it was a very collaborative film where the performances were very heightened because it was a satire. It was sort of a spoof of a self-help group, but it was for serial killers who were trying not to kill people. And the actors were very into collaborating with me on who their characters were and what kind of killers they were and what drove them to want to stop. And that was just such a fun thing. And then seeing their performances come to life on screen. And at that point I had really learned so much about camera work and how to tell a visual story that I was very much in control of that visual, as opposed to my DP just kind of doing their thing and me being okay. And so it was really with that short that I was oh, I love directing and I'm definitely a director.
Yeah, you can tell the difference between actors who want to act because they're interested in the craft of it and actors who want to act for the validation.
Yeah.
And they are two different kinds of actors.
Yeah. What about you?
My appreciation for directing, I think, came on a lot slower. But it also aligned with understanding what the hell a director even was. Because even as early or as late in my quote unquote career as making Brains for the first time, I genuinely didn't understand what a director did and how it was different from a producer, and certainly how it was different from a director of photography. Like, I understood that a director was a person who was vaguely in charge, but when you're on an indie film set and, all of the lines are very blurry, for lack of a better cultural reference,
Right.
like, it's hard to tell if you're not familiar with all the terminology, like where the lines are supposed to be.
Yeah.
So for a long time, like, I was just like, the director's the one who knows about filmmaking and I'm the one who's also here. Great. But over the course of Brains season 1, watching my friend Andrew Williams, who directed that show, or most of the episodes of that show, I really got an appreciation for, it wasn't just the person in charge, it was also the person really guiding things. Like, I think the moment directing as a concept clicked for me was early on in the Brains pilot. The original script of Brains has a lot more like ums and uhs, like literally written into the script for my character to say, because it was like, she was making all of these outrageous claims and was like, very, single-mindedly going after this boy. But I think I, as the writer, was like, well, no one's like this. I should like cage it and, maybe if you want to go to dinner with me, like she was a lot less sure of herself in the script phase. But my director during one of the takes was like, hey, let's just try one take where you don't say any ums and uhs and you just go for it. And I was like, I guess I'll try that, but that's not what the script says. I was very like script obsessed at the time, and I did it and it felt so right, and it completely changed the way that I saw the character and her interactions with other characters. And I realized how important just like a small suggestion like that could be. And from then on, I was like really carefully watching Andrew for all the choices he would make on visual storytelling and on like small little character notes, because it was never, he's a very good director, and I was very lucky to have his personhood be the experience I had at first. And I would just very closely pay attention, because I was like, I think I want to do that instead of the thing I'm doing. I'll keep acting because it's all we've got, but like, I got my eye on the prize. And so the first thing I ever directed was an episode of Brains, which my character was not in until the very end. So it sort of made sense so that I wouldn't have to kind of split focus. And it was like so fun. It was so fun to get to be in that seat and to get to like have people look to me for choices, and I got to have total control over my script and the boys that were acting for me. And yeah, it was just very fun. So yeah, it was a slow burn, and since then I really am not interested in acting unless I get to be like a bombastic villain in somebody else's script.
Yeah,
shout out to anyone who needs a bombastic villain.
So would you say, like, other than Sam and Pat, moving forward, you're just not going to be acting in your stuff?
Probably. Yeah. I mean, it'll depend obviously on like the thing, but I write things now to direct, not to be in. I'm really trying to consciously like not write me characters, but write, me adjacent characters. And I've gotten really specific in like action statements of like directing choices I want to make. And it's like, well, I'm probably gonna have to take this out before I send it to anybody because it's basically just director's notes, but I want to be the one to execute this. And I know that I don't have the capacity to act and direct at the same time. And frankly, I don't believe that anyone does.
Yeah.
Not in a way that I think is sustainable.
I agree. I mean, when you ask actors who starred in what they directed, they always say that they rely so heavily on their AD. And then I'm like,
right, or their DP, or a co-director, or somebody else there.
But then it's like, if you're asking for that person to really like judge your performance and give you notes and kind of be an overseer of your performance, then that's directing, and they should get like a co-directing title.
Yes. Yeah. So the first thing you directed was it wasn't SK.
It was Do-Over. Yeah.
Do-Over.
Right, which we talked a lot about in First Projects. I don't want to kind of rehash stuff I said there, but I learned so much making that, largely because it was so ambitious. And so after that, like, made a bunch of shorts that were, one location and just 2 actors, and really focused on performance and like getting better at talking to actors, giving direction. So for instance, like with Do-Over, Isa, who is the lead actress in Do-Over, she was wonderful. And, we talked a little bit about like the themes in the project and what's going through her head during this time in that the film is set in, but we didn't do any of the stuff that I do now, which is like talking about who this character was before the film started, like what led them here, just to kind of give them sort of like a bio, which is something I do when it's like really important to talk about like what set the stakes of where they are now, like in About a Donkey, which was written by Kelsey, but I went through it with Kelsey and like we kind of agreed upon, you know, this marriage that's being explored at the beginning of the film, because it's a marriage, they're in their 50s and they're unhappy, and the mother is definitely struggling with addiction and she's struggling with depression, and there's a whole bunch of stuff. And so like I really wanted to give Catherine, the actress, like a full kind of bio of how this couple met, like what their life was like, where things started to fall off, and sort of where she is psychologically at the start. Even though it's a comedy, it's like setting the stage, right? That's stuff that I do now that I didn't do with Do-Over. And in hindsight, like, I just made a lot of mistakes. Like, I think that Isa's great, and so she kind of saved it. But a lot of the men that I cast, you know, there's like a creepy guy in the beginning, and then there's another guy at a gas station, and then another guy. That's a thing that you'll see in my films a lot, like creepy men along the way. But there's a killer in her house at the end. But I didn't really do anything with any of them to like talk to them about who are their characters outside of just like this creepiness that I needed them to bring to that one scene. And that's something that I really tried to then like hone in on after that film, was like, okay, let me just focus on character. Let me focus on actors and working with them and the different ways of speaking to them and collaborating with them. And this was, Do-Over was before I ever took a directing class too. And so, yeah, it was just a big learning experience overall.
That's cool. Yeah, I don't think I've ever taken a director's class either, because I didn't go to film school. And then by the time I was in grad school, it was writing and producing. You know, it was about like get the thing made. It was never. I have no idea what one would learn in a director's class, but I could probably get a lot from it, I'm sure.
The one I took, so I can't remember her name, and I feel like an asshole for not remembering her name, but I took one directing class with a woman professor at school, and she gave me a couple of things. One was, she said that 80% of directing is casting, and like that really resonated with me, and I agree with that wholeheartedly.
I would agree with that.
So that's why I control my casting, and even if I were at the point where I could afford a casting director, like I would really need to be very hands-on in that process. And maybe I'll elaborate on that more later on, but she said that, and she also was very good at getting us to talk about a scene. Like every class would be like, talk to me about a scene that really resonated with you and like what you took away from it, and we would sort of dissect scenes, and that was really helpful. I remember the first day of class, I brought up the scene in Alien, which is one of my favorite movies, where the guy who works in the below deck gets attacked by the alien, but you don't see any of it. All you see is the alien tail basically like drop down from the ceiling behind him, and then the rest of the scene plays out with audio and the cat that is watching it happen. The shot is just on a cat watching, and
of course that's what you brought up.
Right, of course it is. But like that was just I just love that scene and that choice, and for so many reasons, just from like it being interesting, it obviously saving you on budget, like you don't have to show this whole attack, and it just like builds more trepidation for what this monster actually looks like and is capable of. And so she was like one of the first, I would say, people that got me really thinking about in a frame, like what's in the frame, what's in the sound, all of the little choices that is directing even beyond performance, and how all of those things create a feeling in the viewer. But I will say that the one thing that I found somewhat limiting is that, and this isn't unique to her, this is like a thing about directing, is that they tell you that you're not supposed to speak to actors in emotions, you're only supposed to speak to them in like intentions. And so like something that she would have us do an exercise over and over is we would get a scene, and then some people in the class would have to act out the scene, and which I will say like I hated doing, but it also I think is good for directors to put yourself in that vulnerable position, and then like having to take direction and what that feels like, because then you sort of being on the other side know how to like do that, dance with someone in a way that's going to
100%.
respect them and stuff. So anyway, I hated doing that, but it was always an exercise where some people were acting and then someone would be the director and have to give notes, and she would never let you give a note that was anything but talking to them about the intentions behind what they're saying or what the context is.
So can you give me an example of what an emotional direction would be? Because I don't think I understand the difference.
It would be like about their emotions. So if it's a scene that's about grief, you don't want to say like, I need it to be sadder, because that's like, what does that mean? And
Sure.
It's directing them with a result, like an end result in mind, as opposed to a psychological state, which is what I prefer over intentions, I would say. So like, instead of talking to them about give it to me sadder, you would maybe talk to them about like, what is the scene that they're coming off of, and what are the psychological stakes of this moment? Like, have they just found out? And you remind them of the context of the moment. And like, this is me now being a director, I would talk about like what I'm not getting, as opposed to saying like, give me more sadness. Like, that's not right.
Right.
But in her way of doing it was always like talking about what does the character want in this moment, and what are the intentions behind the moment or the scene or the line. And I agree with that, but I think it can also be limiting, because sometimes then you're like speaking in this flowery language when you could just be really practical. And
yeah, I can feel
and sometimes
that.
you do need to just say to someone like, that was great, but faster. You know what I mean? So like, I found it to be a helpful class, and it definitely got me out of just like speaking in results, the result that I would want from an actor, and to really think about it as like, they are this person, they've created like a psychological profile of this person and how they would react to things. So let me just like set the stage for them, as opposed to being like, give me this. But I also found it limiting. So all of that to say, very long-winded story, is to say that I think that directing classes can be really helpful, but also a lot of it is just like common sense in a way. Just like, it's like the same way that if you're a writer, you're probably thinking about all of these things when you're writing, like, who are these characters? Why would they make these decisions? What is creating the subtext here or the context here that would make them react this way? And I think that that's what directing is just like giving that or collaborating on that with the actor.
Yeah, that's true. I think I will say the struggle that I think a lot of people, and I've seen a lot of people have with directing, is the act of communicating that. Because like, when we were writing, you have space and time to like sit and think. I've sat still for 15 minutes trying to think of one word before getting it perfect and like moving on with my script. So I can see how maybe for some people like that would be helpful. I've always found it pretty easy to communicate. Like, the more that I know about the thing I'm trying to do, the easier the communication becomes, because what I also consider myself lucky with is that the first director I ever worked with was very much like, this is a collaboration. I am not like your puppet master. And then the second director I ever worked with, not as an actor, just as a producer, was like the opposite. You are my puppets. You emphasize the words I want you to emphasize, or we do it again. And I think that was a really good instruction for me on like, okay, so if I hire someone, I should just trust them, or it's going to cause resentment that'll trickle over the entire cast. Good to know, because I am very much a control freak. But I learned very quickly that is, if you're not getting the performance you want, it's not that like you need to exert more control. It's that you haven't been clear enough in the control you already do have to, mutually come to a position. Like I really quickly had to learn like to divorce myself from the way that I would say lines out loud to myself as I was writing and the way people were going to deliver it. Because there's literally no way that they're going to deliver it the same way, even if you line read to them, even if you parrot the line to them, and it'll just feel false. And it's much better to let them get it out. The important thing is that it's true, not that it sounds like the way you intended it to sound like. As long as the scene plays true, as long as you believe what they're saying and how they're interacting in that space, then that's the goal. And I think a lot of, especially writer-directors, have a hard time separating those things. And I had an issue in the beginning, but luckily I'd seen enough good and bad directors by the time I directed my first like real thing, Ace and Anxious, that it was not quite as prominent in my own directing.
Yeah, I mean, I would say also that's why I think I agree that 80% of directing is casting, because part of it is
Yes,
like
100%.
finding someone who feels right and who does like get the cadence and the timing and the pacing that you're going for, so that even if it's not exactly how you heard it when you were writing it, they just sort of get it and it feels right to them too. And so
Totally.
it comes out like naturally, you know, or saying a slight adjustment, like just asking them to quicken up the pace very slightly will like get them there, you know?
Exactly.
That's why I would have a very hard time with pursuing like name actors and then just like taking whoever will say yes, which is sort of what you're advised to do in this industry, is like you want to get your film out there, you want to get it as big as possible, go after name actors and take whoever will like show up for a day and just do it. As much as like I understand the reach that would get me, I just couldn't. That's so hard, you know, because I've been in situations where the actor just does not feel like that person, and either I've settled or it's a situation where like I haven't directed for hire really, which I know we're going to talk about in a bit, but I have done stuff where I'm like collaborating slightly, so like I'm co-directing or something like that, and so maybe an actor comes along with the project and I didn't get to choose them, and so it's like not quite there. And for me, like I think some directors like to say how they like pull performances out of people, and I think right, exactly, and I think so much of that is just like manipulation, and like you could do it without doing that. Like they probably would give you that.
Yeah, like Alfred Hitchcock and the Birds, like
yeah.
You know,
My
that
God.
kind of nonsense.
Right, exactly. So, but for me, it's like I'm just a guide. Like I'm there to create an environment where you can like be your best and do your best work, and to just like keep you on track along the way. But like I'm not able to turn someone into something, right? And like
right.
That's why I just have a hard time with the idea of not being able to cast my own projects completely.
Yeah, no, I feel that. So do you have a sense of like, how do you describe your directing to other people? Like what would you consider are like the tent poles of the Christina Reyes style of directing? And also I'm just curious about your process.
Do you mean on set or in general?
Let's start with the art and then go back to the brass tacks of practical stuff. Like what do you think if somebody watches something that you have directed, what are the things that you think are really indicative of your style?
So I would say pacing, like building in tension, because I do a lot of genre work. Obviously, like pacing is a huge part of that, but it also is in comedy. And for me, like if I were to say my style as a whole in terms of working with me, I think I'm a very collaborative director. So like I have a very clear vision, but I'm very collaborative in who I bring on, like knowing that they're gonna bring something special and unique to it. There are definitely some like trademarks of mine that you would probably find.
Yeah, what do you think if I watched two films that were technically the same film but one was not directed by you and one was, like what do you think are things that would like cue me to, oh, that's a Christina Reyes directed thing right there?
Yeah, so I would say that I tend to lead with sort of character first. I'm very focused on people and on relationships. So a big thing for me is when I was really studying visual storytelling, something that I would do is watch films muted and like see what the frame was telling me. And I think if you did that to some of my films, particularly my features where there's like an evolution as opposed to, you know, a single like 3-minute something, right? You would see that I like to tell you, because I do a lot of ensemble pieces, especially my features, I like to tell you the relationship between these people through the way I frame them. So for instance, in Summit, which is about 5 friends going on a ski trip, and then by the end, they've all like turned on each other. In the beginning, they share frames as much as possible. They're like constantly in a group, or they're in 3s and 2s. There's never like barriers between them. They're always sort of shoulder to shoulder, very like tight knit. And as the film progresses, they start to get separated more and more. So you would see like either there's a physical barrier put between them in a frame, like, you know, a chair or a table or something, or they start to have singles completely. And then I will break up certain people, like these two are on the same side, so they'll have a 2-shot, but this person is by themselves, so they're only going to get singles. And similarly with About a Donkey at the beginning of the film, the parents who are unhappily married at the beginning of the film, they never share a frame together. There's only one wide shot, and in that wide shot, there's like a nightstand separating them, and their chairs are sort of on opposite sides of the frame. And by the end, they're only in 2 shots because it is like a happy movie where things work out, unlike Summit. But for me, I think if you watch my longer stuff, and even with Kelsey, our web series, I like to take you on like a journey of choices that tell a story in and of itself. So there's the framing thing with Kelsey, because we did a lot of flashbacks. It was non-linear, and so we had lenses that only would happen in flashback scenes versus the sort of timeline that you're watching. Also, with Kelsey, because she goes from being like unhappy and feeling like she needs to rely on her friends a lot, we only used lenses that were 50 or wider, I think was the case. We went from like a 25 to a 50, just in that range. And then as the series went on and she became more grounded and she became more like self-sufficient and secure, and like it became a more intimate series, and she started, dating Joanne, who is the love interest of the show, then we were only on, I think we stuck with a 50 in the middle, but then at some point we were 75 or tighter. And if we were going to do a wide shot, we were only going to use a 50. And so like that was an evolution in the way that it looked to sort of bring you into like this more intimate space. And also with Summit, like the color tone changed. We went from a more kind of like vibrant color to a very, very desaturated look. Like I was really pulling the color out of their lives, especially because like in the film they go like 3 days without food, and they're like really just gross looking because they haven't showered. They're stuck in this house, and so you don't see it like as you're watching it because it's very slow, and so it's like not something that's drastic. But if you were to compare the first scene to the last scene, you'd be like, holy shit, like this looks very different.
That's really cool.
Yeah, I mean Summit was a little bit excessive in that because I also color coded all the characters to represent different things. So like Sean, who's like the hot-headed character in the film, is only wearing red. Like red is his color. And Will, who's envious of Sean because he has a crush on Jessie, who's Sean's girlfriend, he wears green throughout the film.
That's actually, I mean, that's fun, especially for like a slashery horror sort of a thing.
Totally.
And since it's in the snow, so like I imagine having some colorful contrast was always.
I mean, I'm still happy with that choice, but it is like, because their jackets are the color, and then also like whatever they're wearing under is the color. And so it's just like, so that when they take their jackets off when they're inside the house, they still have that color on. And sure. It's like a little excessive, but I still dig it because, again, it fills like the frame more with color when you're just like surrounded by white. And I also pulled back, so like they became darker, more muted versions of those colors by the end of the film, but they were still their colors. And it also was like a hint to who the killer is, who's like this cold-hearted blue in the film. So if you haven't seen it, you can watch it and you'll know now. But
that's cool. That's very fun though.
Yeah, and so I would say like that playfulness is something you will find in my work a lot. And like I'm very kind of referencey in the way that I do things. So like the gaze, the shooting style changes 3 times because there's technically 3 different like films within the film. There's a sort of 80s movie happening on the TV screen that the main character is watching, and that's like a sort of Scream kind of movie that then turns out to be a movie set, and then we're in the real movie. And so I spoke to my DP and I also spoke to my composer about kind of reference films. And so it was like the first one is sort of like When a Stranger Calls. So like 70s, 80s, that's sort of the framing we were going for. And then when we were in the movie that they're shooting in the film, we're in Scream, like the camera movement, the way that I move in that. And also the music is very Scream. And then I used It Follows as a reference for the rest of the film.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So that's the, like, I don't know, if you're a really big fan of horror movies, you would catch it. Like, I did that with Night In as well, which is an earlier film. It's very Scream. It's intentionally very Scream. So you will see like an appreciation for the movies that I love and like made me want to make movies, but I always kind of bring my own flavor to it.
Cool. Very cool.
What about you? What's your like style, and what makes your work read you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've quite gotten as solidified of a directing style as you do, just because I haven't done it quite as much, and because I tend to direct the things that I write, and my writing has such a voice that it's hard to look away. But I do think that we're similar in the relationship and framing sort of aspect. Like, I'm also a big fan of being intentional about who can be seen in each other's frames. Sometimes, like Ace and Anxious, I only got to be so inventive with my directing choices because of just timing, and because there were a lot of problems that plagued that set. Like, my lead actress had to leave by 2 p.m. every day, so for usually like at least half of the coverage of conversations that she was in, she wasn't even literally there, so I couldn't like dirty the frame, and even though I really wanted to, so like there was just like a functional reason why some of the framing is not what I would have liked, and then also an actor didn't show up, and we had to recast very quickly with the people we had. We had to kind of restructure some people, and so some of the choices that we were planning on making, we just like physically couldn't, because we needed to move on with the day. But I will say for like for the most recent things I've directed, so Buy-In, my only like true horror thriller kind of thing, something that I really enjoyed working on in that film in particular was playing with power. And power structures, because everyone in that film technically, well, 2 of the characters knew each other, but the 2 primary characters did not. They were strangers. And so depending on who I wanted you to think had the power at the time, and who in the scene thought that they had the power, they would take up physically more of both their own frame and the other person's. So when we were filming the person who was at least at first perceived to be the victim in the scene, he, in his like medium coverage, he only had like a third of the frame. The other 2/3 were like the back of the other actor's head or like shoulder. Like, you know, he didn't even have his own space. Like, that's how claustrophobic it was. And we also shot him from above, so we were not only looking down on him, but he also had so little of his own frame to like take up, because, you know, he was just this small mousy, you know, victim. But then as the scene progressed, not only did we move a little bit further away from the other actor's shoulder, so he got to take up more space in his own frame, but we also started moving the camera down, and on the flip side, he started taking up more of the other guy's frame finally. And the other guy, who we started on a really low angle of, which is not hard because this guy is like 6'6", we also started to film him from a little bit higher up. So like the over the course of the film, who has the most space literally in their own frames changed as we understood how the power dynamics were playing out. And that was like a really fun thing to kind of map with my DP and with my actors. And I think it went pretty well. But then on the less horror side of things, I've also been directing a lot of like rom-com-y stuff. Actually, the only 2 main director for hire gigs that I've ever gotten, Better With You, 7-episode Halloween rom-com, and then Rosalie, a 6-episode queer kind of coming of age, like late in the game coming of age story. Both of them have romance plots and are comedies. And so in those, I try to make sure that like when we're on our like main love interest couple, they're always in each other's frames until there's some kind of like strife. So like if there's a fight, you know, we'll move away, but like when we're filming stuff with them, anyone else I would probably just give their own frame. I wouldn't even bother dirtying it, so we could let the other actor have a like chance to breathe. But when it's the 2 love interests, I gotta see them together. I want to see, you know, the corner of one of their face reacting to a cute thing that their partner has said, things like that. Like, I want to watch the nonverbals play out. And so for that reason, I also like longer takes, and I like tighter like 2 shots. I try to play as much of the scene as I can in an intimate shot where we can really see both actors sort of play off one another, almost like theater. I like watching the natural reactions that people have when they're just fully immersed in character and in conversation. And in some cases, I don't watch things with the sound off, but I sometimes like whenever two characters are on screen, I look at the one that isn't talking mostly during the scene, because I think that's where you get the most interesting moments.
Yeah, I would say I also really like to see reactions. I do a lot of ensemble pieces, so like that's part of why my favorite thing is the edit sometimes, is like you have so many options of where you can cut to, and so often I like to just like cut to a reaction for a punchline, maybe not even on the person. But I wouldn't say that I have long takes. I mean, About a Donkey is sort of an outlier in terms of my work, because we were trying to shoot a 110-page script in 12 10-hour days. So like we had to, a lot of it was like, we're going to make choices that serve the story, but also serve our production needs. And so it was like, the whole thing is natural light. We committed to shooting it on one lens. We were like, we're never going to swap a lens. And we're going to do sticks, which like normally I'm not so into just being on sticks the whole time. But
that was the next thing I was going to mention is, I don't like being on sticks. If at all possible, I like remaining fluid. I like when the DP has to shift a little bit because the character's shifting, because I think that also adds some tension. But no, please continue.
No, but I was going to say that's one of the films where I do have longer takes, where it's just like living in the sort of kind of awkwardness or like silence, because it is a film where there's a lot of punchiness to the dialogue, but it's also, there's like a lot of sadness that's under the surface and sort of getting to a newer place, but then also a lot of cuteness, because there's like also, it's a rom-com as well within the film for the older daughter. And so we did a lot of two shots, like long two shots, in a way that I probably wouldn't choose to normally. I like to have options in post. I like to have options for reaction shots, is sort of what I'm getting at. But I think it works in About a Donkey, but I feel like in some ways it is a reflection of like my ingenuity as a director and my ability to kind of like create relationships through framing and stuff, but it's probably not an example of my usual pacing or like the usual kind of choices I would make. But I do like long takes when we're shooting, because I like people to do full run-throughs, because I think like allowing them to get into the groove is better than just asking them to do this little snippet.
Yeah, the way that I direct is similar in that, like, especially when, there's kind of a lot going on, I don't like calling cut if I don't have to. Especially because I'm usually editing as well, so I don't care that they're long takes. When I'm working with another editor, sometimes I'm like, okay, fine, I'll call cut. But I find that calling cut can a lot of times suck the energy out of a sequence. So I really, when I'm working with a new DP especially, I'm always like, when I say reset, that doesn't mean cut camera. That means we're going to go back to one and try it again, because I want to keep the energy that we've got and just sort of go back into it. And also, I also agree that I like letting them kind of work up to the momentum. Especially, I like starting on the wide shot or the two shot and then going in for close-ups, which I think is pretty standard. But for me, what I like is that it lets them work out the natural pacing ahead of time, so then they're less frustrated when we get into the one shots. And I'm like, you can't interrupt each other. You have to leave clean air in the dialogue so I can edit. And they're always going to be frustrated, especially actors that aren't as comfortable with film acting. But at least they know they've executed a version of the scene that is the actual pacing, or like close enough to the actual pacing, so that I can be like, we've got that. I promise you, I'm not going to screw you over, but I'm begging you to stop jumping on her line, or whatever it ends up being.
I like to start with a wide too, just to sort of give everyone a view of what it's all going to look like. So not just for the actors, but also and the DP, even though we've probably done a blocking rehearsal, but also for sound, like for them to see where people are going to be moving in the scene, or just generally for everyone to get on board with the pacing. And for me as a director, it's also where I see strengths and weaknesses, so that I can make decisions on who's like the order of coverage, because then I can say like, sometimes it's what I know, having worked with a lot of the same actors over and over. I know that this person is really strong right out of the gate, but then they lose steam, versus this person needs to ramp up, But even if I've never worked with them before, it's a good kind of like barometer, for me to say like, okay, that person, maybe we will do them last, so that I can get a sense of what they're giving me as I get everyone else's coverage. And then I know exactly what notes to give them when I get to them, That's generally why I find wides helpful, because mostly like I never use a wide, maybe for like the beginning or end of a scene, but generally I'm rarely ever cutting to a wide.
Yeah, I don't cut to wides very often, but that's why and sometimes I don't even like do a wide, I just do a two shot, because I will cut back to a two shot occasionally. especially if it's actors that I've worked with before and I have a sense that there's going to be a continuity of performance. I've found that when I'm working with not as familiar actors, I can't do that as much just because like there's too much variance in between what they're doing in close-ups versus what they're doing in the wide. But so it very much depends on the cast for me.
What do you do before set? Like, what do you have a process of working with actors before actually getting to the day?
That was what I was gonna ask you about rehearsals. So perfect. Let's start with this. So I obviously it depends on like the circumstances of set. Like, you know, my ideal set is we do a big group table read where we have all the actors there and all like the key crew members. So production design, AD, DP, and, you know, a handful of producers, whoever needs to be there. And if everyone else wants to come, that they're welcome as well. But those are sort of the main people I want. And then just do a full table read with everybody and like just as a centering point for people. And then at the end, we all kind of just talk through person by person, like how they're feeling about their character, you know, what their motivations are, what things they're confused by, challenges they see, and just sort of like work it out at the table of like, this is the story we're all telling, just kind of get on a general same page. And then the day of, we'll do like some read-through rehearsals while people are setting up camera, and I'll just like work with the actors on like, hey, let's just do a quick rehearsal. Let's, you know, make sure your lines are good, and we'll kind of talk through anything, and we'll just sort of like all get on the same page just within that scene of, okay, this is what we're doing. If there's a blocking moment, then we'll do a blocking rehearsal just with actors to make sure that they're comfortable with the movements and it feels natural for them. Then we'll bring in camera for a rehearsal so that the camera person can feel out where they need to be, especially if there's a lot of movement. And then we'll just go in for a take. And then in terms of like my script, I like to split my script into two parts. So on the left side of my script are acting notes. So anything that I want to have in my head on the day, like this, you know, I really want them to hit this word or this line or something like that. And then on the right side will be like more technical notes. So like I want the camera to be low here or things like that. And usually these are things that I've talked about with the, you know, various crew members before, but I like to keep my script straight. So, you know, at least a handful of weeks before I go into production, I like to sit down with a hard copy of my script and just go through it and make my like directing notes and acting notes on their respective sides so that I have everything kind of in place. And then when we're doing the scene, I can go back through and be like, oh, right, I need to make sure that the camera is in this position at this moment. And I, you know, even in the scene, if I don't have time to take notes, I've kind of preset some notes that I want to make sure I hit on.
Yeah, so I would say I'm similar. I don't like too much rehearsing because I feel like it can start to become wooden, and especially if they have to bring something really emotional, it can be like too rehearsed, really. So sure. I always do a table read. I'm a big fan of table reads, and I usually will I invite crew, but it's not mandatory except for, you know, DPs really, and like anyone else that's really, like my AD is my editor, so he's always there as well. And we always invite crew, and I always make it like a dinner of some kind. So it's also like, we're going to hang out after and eat dinner. And we'll do a read through. We'll talk about it as a group. I usually will then maybe schedule like a call to talk one-on-one with anyone who I felt like wasn't quite grasping who the character is or something like that. But that's not always the case. Like the last thing I directed was, other than films about starring my cats, other than Feline Fables, the last thing I directed was Game Brunch, my short that has 6 characters in it. And I think it was only like 2 of them I actually set up a call with, because 3 I had worked with a whole bunch and was like, I know what I'm gonna get, like you get it, and you don't need to have this like one-on-one, but I might do that. And then we might set up a blocking rehearsal if blocking is a big deal, like with the gaze, because there's like a scene where she has to run through the apartment, and then there's a scene where we have all one take walk down a block. Like we did a blocking rehearsal for those things. And then even like Enough, my film Enough, there's quite a bit of action in that because it's a home invasion, and one of the characters has to get hit in the head with the butt of a gun, and so like we had to do a lot of blocking rehearsing for that. But generally I don't usually have it be a separate day. It might be like the morning of the shoot, we've built in time for that. And yeah, and so like it's really just where we do, you know, run throughs the day of, like, okay, let's run through it for camera. And then for me, like the first take, the wide shot is sort of like the rehearsal, where then I'm like, okay, I can see what needs adjusting and then give notes and go from from there, especially because with my projects, it's like time is money. And so I'm paying people like very little for the day of, but I don't really have the money to pay them to like show up for rehearsals and stuff like that. And I don't want to take up too much of their time. So I have to really like maximize the time that we have on set as much as possible.
Yeah, I also don't generally tend to do separate day rehearsals. We like that's I think more of just a scheduling game of you and your DP and your AD if you're lucky enough to have one, being really clear about like what days you're going to need more time for. So like the rehearsal for harder shots is baked into the schedule that day. So like there's a scene in Better With You and it's the main fight between the two love interests, and we decided to do that as an all one fluid take, and it was a really complex scene on a lot of levels. Like, you know, we just there was a lot going on, and both of the actors were like it's an intense scene for them and they're really dating. So having this kind of like emotionally fraught thing that they had to do perfect from start to finish was very emotionally vulnerable for them. So like they had talked to me beforehand about like, hey, we need to do some rehearsals, and we also would prefer to not do them in front of anyone but like you and the DP. Like, do you think it's going to be too much of a big deal to like ask everyone else to just go hang out in another part of the house for this night? And luckily the location we were at was pretty big, so we could give them that separation. But so yeah, for that one we made sure that was like the second thing of the day. We had wrapped as many other of the actors as we possibly could up until that scene, and then we gave them a lot of space to just sort of work through it together. And like as the kind of actors were doing almost their own separate rehearsal together, me and the DP were kind of off to the side, like observing their little like song and dance, and then kind of figuring out on our own how we were going to cover it, because we wanted the camera moves to be like basically following the actors. And we wanted them to feel like they had the autonomy, so we were more reacting to what they were doing and just giving them space to experiment. And I love that scene, and I'm really proud of it. And I think that especially when you're working with actors you really trust, letting them kind of figure it out themselves, especially when it's a couple of them in a scene and you're just like, go ham. Like, let's see what happens with you guys. And then kind of reacting to that because everything is sort of a well-oiled machine. Those are the magic directing moments.
Totally. I mean, that's why I keep going back to this, but really like directing actors is casting because I want to cast someone who feels like the character, who gets the character, and is then going to make choices that feel like who that person is. And so a lot of the time, like my DP and I would never do like a blocking rehearsal without the actors there, because the actors would guide that. It's like, if they have to go grab a cup from the cabinet, like, you show me how they'll go do that. Like, I'm not going to tell you how to walk over there and do that. And so it is a lot of just like meeting them where they're at. And I will say my DP, Peter, who's really great, he's my DP for most of my stuff. He's a big fan of like, I'm going to follow the actors, let them do what they want. He's never the kind of DP that's like, that doesn't work for my frame. He's like, if that's where they want to be, then that's like, I'm going to make that work for the camera. And I do love
my
that.
DP Brandon's like that as well. He also, like me, really likes being not on sticks. Like, he loves being able to move around and like get up in there, and I love that. He's in med school now, so I don't think he'll ever be my DP again, which is very sad. But by the end, like, he and I worked together on like, I think 4 separate projects, and by the end, like, I could sort of just grunt at him and he would know exactly what I needed. Like, that's something that I find as a director I really need help with, because like my brain sometimes doesn't process language in a way that makes sense to other human beings. Like, I know exactly what I need, but it'll come out as like, I need it to be more you know. And like by the end, Brandon Smalls, my DP on Brain Season 2, Ace and Anxious, and Buy-In, he would be like, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. Or like, I'll just like move my head a little bit and he'll be like, oh, I see what you need. Okay, cool. Which that you can't plan for that sort of a thing, but I really appreciated it. So yeah, I miss that. I just, that's one of the most fun relationships that I ever have, is like between me and whoever my DP is, and sort of just like doing my best to explain the technical thing I need them to do, even though I do not have the vocabulary or my own skill set to really back it up. But I know the vibe that I need, and the best DPs are the ones who can like pick up on the vibe and execute it in a way that like actually looks good. And that's, I would say at least 10% of directing is having a DP relationship that is really, really like give and take.
For
you
sure.
know?
Yeah.
That they're not just waiting for you to tell them exactly where to place camera, but they're also not taking so much control that it's just like, no, that doesn't look good. You know, like it's all about collaboration, like you said. Like on every level, a director, I don't think, is really making a lot of choices. They are just seeing what choices other people are already making and deciding which ones work best together and making sure that they're set as a place where people feel comfortable experimenting with one another and that there's trust and safety. And if something goes weird, it's fine. We're doing a weird thing together.
Right. It's like you're overseeing, and it's like your job as the director is to always have the big picture in mind and just making sure that the puzzle pieces, like, they can change and morph a little, but as long as they all fit together in the end, that's really what matters. And so it's like you make sure that everything that's a choice that's made makes sense with that, but it doesn't have to be exactly what you like come in expecting. And I personally love seeing what like an actor gives me, or what my DP, like what they think would be really funny here. Like when I was making Game Brunches, which was my last film, I was like, I want to change the shooting style up in some way whenever Ricardo says something that seems threatening, but like is in hindsight maybe isn't, but like something to sort of create this like funny note of this is maybe like an off-kilter kind of comment. And it was my DP's idea to do like a slow push in. So it's all like a handheld film, nothing's on sticks, nothing's really steady, but it's not like shaky. It's just sort of like, it's, you know, smooth, it's casual, it's like very rom-com-y. And then Ricardo will say this like comment, and then all of a sudden the camera does this slow push in. And it's really funny. I think it's really funny.
I know. I can't believe that no one is, like, not very many people have seen it yet. Because I feel like I read the script, like, almost 2 years ago. Yeah. And then I saw it, like, a year ago. And I'm like, Christina, you need to put it out.
I know.
I need to talk about this.
We shot it in November 2019, and I really wanted to be on the festival circuit because I really want to watch it with an audience, you know, and it's just...
Yeah, that would be a fun one to watch with an audience.
Yeah, so I don't know if I'm really going to get to do that, but... In any case, that was like a choice that my DP suggested, and I just loved it, and it like added so much to it, you know. Again, it's like casting, hiring, choosing people who are going to bring what like this special thing to the project, and then seeing what they give you, and then you can like, you know, make adjustments or talk about what you're not getting, but ultimately it's like it's collaborative. It's everyone has a piece of ownership to it. The other thing I wanted to say about before set is, though I'm not a big fan of rehearsal, I am a big fan of like togetherness. So like if I have a couple on screen, I make them go on a date together. Like I will pay for them to go on a date together.
Interesting.
Because I want them to feel like familiar and to really get to know each other and to like build some sort of bond. On the other hand, if they meet in the film and don't start dating until later, I don't want them to go on a date. Maybe like mid-production I would ask them to. But generally I try and like have the actors create their own relationships that like I don't exist in. And so for instance, with About a Donkey, there's a couple in the film, the middle daughter and her husband, who's played by Ricardo, who's like
I was just gonna say, isn't that also Ricardo?
Yeah. Yeah, but Annie and Paul, the characters, I was like, go on a date. You met in college, but that's all I'm going to tell you. Come up with your like meet cute. And they ended up coming back and telling me how they met, and they had like a really cute story, and they had gotten to know each other, and you can kind of like feel it on set. Then they have this like playfulness where there's like something real there. With About a Donkey, we did like a family brunch where we had the whole family come, and I made pancakes, and Kelsey and I were there, Kelsey the writer, and then the cast, and we just like talked about this family and like what are the family dynamics, but it was also just for all of them to like bond. And with Summit, even because all the characters are supposed to be friends for, you know, from college leading up to the film, part of it was like for like money purposes. With crowdfunding, I wanted to cast the actors really early, so I cast them in a year in advance before we actually shot this film. Yeah, so like I would do movie nights and invite them over and, you know, have just like group hangs where they all really did become friends for that like period of time leading up to the movie. And I think you feel it, especially because the two characters that are supposed to have a lot of like, they don't trust each other and they don't like each other, the actors actually didn't. And I don't know if it was like a method thing on their part, but it like just so happened that they had this weird dislike of each other. Not that they were, not so much that they didn't want to work together, but just that you can like tell that the others were friends and these two were not. And then like I think that read in the movie. I also did a little bit of like method directing on set in that I halfway through the shoot, because we shot the film in order for the most part, it was like a lot in order, and by the end they're all supposed to be like at each other's throats, and so for the second half of the shoot I made them all share a bedroom because we were all on location. And so while most people had like 3 people in a room, they were 5 in a room together. And I don't know if that added anything, but they were up for it. They were like totally like, you know. And then one of them was like, okay, I need to get the hell out of here and like get my own hotel room by the end, which she did. But that was because she was just so like tired of sharing a bedroom with so many people. But I talked about Summit a lot in First Project, so for anyone who is a longtime listener, you know it was an intense shoot. But the last thing I like to say is sometimes, not always, but sometimes I like to give people reference films so that we're kind of like speaking the same tonal language. So, for instance, with Game Brunch, I asked everyone to watch Clue and Shaun of the Dead. And then Ricardo in particular, I was like, watch Clue and really watch Tim Curry's performance, and watch Young Frankenstein and really like any Gene Wilder performance. And he's such a great actor, and he's so, Ricardo I'm speaking of, though Gene Wilder as well, but Ricardo is such a great actor, and he's so fun because he's just like game to play. And sure, this was a performance where you could really like play with the delivery so much. And so I was kind of like, you know, watch the way both of those actors, Tim Curry and Gene Wilder, play with like volume and pacing even within one line. You know, they're just like so funny. Their comedic timing is so good. And they're both movies that are like kind of funny, but in like a sort of dark sci-fi situation or like dark thriller situation. And so that was something that I like asked him to do. And I think he came in and like really had, I could tell that he was like playing with a lot of the stuff that I asked him to play with and sort of observe from them without like copying, which is what I think you get from a good actor, is like I wasn't asking him to imitate anyone, but just to sort of observe their playfulness with a single line and like how you could deliver something so many different ways. And so in lieu of rehearsing and not having a lot of time on set, because on set, like my notes are very concise, very like they're supportive, but they're direct, and they're just really like short and sweet. And if you're doing it well, I probably like won't say anything other than great, that was great, let's move on, or let's do another. But I try to keep it really, really tight on set because we just don't have time. And so I try to do as much ahead of time as possible, and that isn't like telling you what to do, but it's just sort of like giving you the sort of tone that I'm going for, and like just making sure that you understand the character and I'm available for any questions, really.
Yeah, so a couple of things that I was thinking of as you were saying all of that. So the first thing is I rarely have time to get people together before shooting if we're not strictly doing a meeting all together. But a little over a year ago, we were shooting a kissing scene, the first kiss scene for Rosalie, for the web series that I was hired to direct by a former student. And both of the actors were fairly, neither of them had ever done a on-screen kiss, so they'd never done like kissing on camera. And both of them were also pretty, they hadn't done a lot of just private citizen kissing, as it were. So there was a lot of like uncomfortableness. So what we did for that scene was we did everything up until that point, because the kiss ends the episode. And then I was like, okay, everyone else get out of the bedroom. And so then I sat with them and I was like, I want both of you to like, all right, I want you to hold their like upper shoulders, just sort of like hold, like be in a space touching and just look at each other. Make eye contact. It's going to feel weird, but I just want you to do it. I was trying to exercise the sort of general discomfort of being in someone's space who you're not actually intimate with. And I had them do that a couple of times. And then I was like, all right, I'm going to leave you guys in here. I just want you to talk, but I want you to like be like touching knees or something, because they were on like the edge of the bed. I was like, I want some part of your body to be touching. Don't make it weird, but like I want some part of your body to be touching, and just chat. We're going to go talk about lighting out here, and I'll come check in with you guys in a little bit. And I don't know how that helped. The kiss is a very cute scene, and they both did really lovely, but I really wanted to make sure that like you guys have the space to feel this out, make sure you're comfortable. I also want you guys to be clear on like what either of you are comfortable with. Like, is touching the face okay? Is touching like the side of your waist okay? Like, I want you guys to work that out, and I'm going to be here to capture whatever thing that you guys do. So that was something that we kind of worked on. And that was also like, that set is a lot of sort of me being in like a teacher position, because not only is the creator my former student, although we're basically the same age, teaching grad school is weird, but also just because everyone on that set is pretty amateur. They're learning. They've grown so much since their first project, but like, I very much in every capacity have to kind of take on a teaching position first and a directing position second, because first I just need to make sure, do you know what it means when I say rule of thirds, you know, or like, okay, so I think we need to change the lighting. I don't actually know what we need to do, but let's work this out. So that's been an interesting sort of thing that I have to do. But then the other thing I was thinking of is like, the two main directing notes I give people are not related to like necessarily character at all. The first one is slow down, which I know is my own Achilles heel in acting and in just being a person. I talk too fast. But like, I've noticed, because I work with a lot of comedy and comedic writing, the performers tend to try and race through the line because they're worried about like landing the punchline. But when you're doing a piece that's not a hard joke, like you're not doing a Colbert monologue, you know, like you're a person having a conversation. But I've noticed that a lot of actors tend to rush through lines that they want to be quippy, because in their mind, quippy means quick, but like then it just sounds monotone. And so a lot of my notes, especially for directing comedy, are like, it's okay to slow down. The words mean something. You are saying something. You're not making a joke. You are saying something that happens to be funny. I need you to slow down so you can feel all of that. Like, find your levels. Find what you're trying to communicate. I promise it'll be funny, but you gotta actually say the words like they're separate things. And then the other thing is just speak up. Specifically because I work with Colin Hinckley and actors so much, usually most of my notes are like, all right, so this was good, slow down here, Colin, talk louder. Which is so funny because he's a theater actor, but he's so quiet.
That's funny. I find that because I do a lot of casting, like I hold a lot of auditions, unless it's like I'm casting someone I've worked with before or I've written a role for them, which was the case with Game Brunch. I find like what those things are in the room, in the audition room, and then sort of like know what notes to give them as we move forward. But something that I really love is when actors tell me how they like to be communicated with, and I try to meet them there. And even if they don't tell me, I find like the way that they're communicating with me about character is probably how they want to receive it. And so I think part of directing is just like being in tune with what each actor is giving you, so that you can sort of speak to them in their language. For instance, Catherine Westling, who's so lovely, plays the mom in About a Donkey. When I first auditioned her, I was like, she's so funny, she's so sweet. Like, I think she's very likable, which was very important for this character who's, you know, very unlikable seemingly at the beginning. And I was like, one of the things that I had in the back of my head was that she's a theater actor and she has like a tendency to go very big. And, you know, film is more about subtlety, right? And when I offered her the role, and we started talking about character, one of the very first things she said to me is, she's like, I want you to know that I have a tendency to go big. And if there's ever a point where I'm doing a take and you think it's too big, just literally tell me that and I will tone it down. And I was like, I love you for saying that to me, especially because like I've been in situations like when I was making Do-Over where like actors just can't hear that they're like going too big, and I never would know how to phrase it that's like in a way that's not going to damage their egos. And it's rarely a note I've ever had to give since, really, but just like I really like that when actors communicate what it is that they want or need, because like I'm very into backstory, I'm very into like being collaborative, coming up with who these characters are. But if that's not your thing, like just tell me, and that's fine too. But I think so much of the time people think like directing is imposing your vision onto people, and that's just so not it. In my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. The worst director I've ever worked with as a producer, thankfully not as an actor, was someone who like, he was the star, he was the director, he was the editor, he was the DP. Somebody else operated the camera when he physically couldn't, but sometimes he would literally operate the camera himself if he wasn't on camera. He was the producer, he was the AD, like he was everything. And literally everyone was his puppet. Like, I came in the second part of the thing we were shooting. I'm trying to stay vague, but if anyone knows my work history, you're going to be able to pretty quickly figure out who it is. But I came in later, like they'd already shot a lot of stuff. And by the time I got there, like some of the actors had already been with him before. And I was talking to one of them and I noticed something on a scene. I was like, hey, does that usually happen? Because he was just giving everyone line readings. And they were like, oh yeah, the first couple of times that we shot this, I tried to like come in, like I had all this like motivation stuff. And like I had this really cool idea who the character was. And then I really quickly realized, oh no, I need to literally interpret what was on the script into my mouth. So like if there's an italicized word, that's the word I have to hit. And once I figured that out, it got a lot easier and we had to do fewer takes. It's not as fun, but like, I'm getting content for my reel. And I was like, oh God, that is such a low bar. And it was just like watching that take place was so demoralizing. And by the end, I was not the only one who was demoralized. And like the sort of iron-fisted approach to it made for a worse project because like I would hear some of the other actors like rehearsing together or like doing a little scene with this person not in it, and it was so funny, and then they would get on camera and he would beat it out of them. It was so sad to watch. And you watched especially like the newer actors who like hadn't been a part of the project before coming into the scene excited, and you would watch the different way that they walked away from it. And also like all the crew who were consistently under resourced, but and like we really were just like mic stands at a certain extent. Like we held his fancy equipment for him. It was awful. And I was like, I never want to do this. I never want to be like this. I this is the exact model that I never ever want to reach. And it was just such a shame because there were so many talented people that worked on that, and he managed to like collect so many people, all of whom were criminally underused.
3 things I want to say. So one, for me, I think so much of being a good director is like stepping out of the way and allowing the actors to talk to each other and like find it together, especially if it is like about their characters' emotions with each other, And the other thing I wanted to say was just a funny story, which I told when we were recording a previous episode, but we cut it out. But it was when I was in college, I was script supervising for this film that was being directed by this older white guy who was a producer turned director. It was his first time directing, and he had spent so much money. Like I was getting paid so much. I think it was like $250 a day to be a script supervisor. And it's the only time I've ever been paid that for being on set. But he had like rented this house in New Jersey, and it was a big house with so many windows, and they had black wrapped the entire house so that it would look like night. And they had this dolly that was going through the whole house. Like it was just so excessive. He obviously had money, but he had never like really paid attention to directing clearly, and maybe he definitely read like a book or took one of the classes like what I referenced earlier where they talked to you about intentions and how you're only supposed to speak to them in intentions, because every time that he would yell cut and go over to give them a note, he would just say to the actors, remember your intentions, don't forget your intentions. And like I don't know if he ever had a separate conversation with them about what their intentions were, but the fact that he would always just come over and say that, like with nothing else, not even like, that was great or faster. He would just be like, okay, we're going to do it again. Remember your intentions. And the actors were just like, so do you want me to do it differently? Like, what is that supposed to mean? And I just watched that for 2 days. It was a 2-day shoot. And like for 2 days, I just watched him do that over and over. And it was a terrible film in general, like from the script and the fact that the woman was just like wearing this revealing nightgown the whole time for no apparent reason. And so it was just terrible. But that for me was like an early example of how not to direct because it was just absurd. And then the last thing I was going to say, I think also directing, and not just for the actors, but for the crew as well, it's kind of like leading by example. And that to me is like, if you're shooting in a car and it's really hot and we can't have the AC on because the sound will be a problem, then I'm not going to be like in an air conditioned car watching from with the monitor from in there, you know? Or like if it's really cold, like I'm not going to be like wrapped up inside when you have to be out in the cold in the woods or whatever, which was, you know, Summit. And one of the, like a quick story, there was in About a Donkey, one of the actors has to run across the lawn without her shoes on, and it had just rained, so the lawn was wet, and I could and like in my mind I was like, okay, I don't want her to run across the lawn without her shoes on and step on a rock and like get hurt and also like fuck up my day, because then we have to like deal with that and we lose our light and all of that. So I decided to take my shoes off and run across the lawn to make sure that if there were any rocks, I would step on them and get hurt myself, but not her. And simultaneously, as I'm like in the process of starting to do this, I hear her complaining to like one of the other actors about having to run through the wet grass barefoot, and like she's not happy about doing it. And then she saw me doing that, and I was already planning to do it because of the rock thing, but she interpreted it as me being like, you're right, like I'm gonna run with you so that you don't have to be the only one running through the grass wet. And she was like, oh my God, Christina, you're so great. Like, I love that you did that. and I was like, cool. Like, I mean, yeah, like I would, if I had heard you complaining and wasn't already planning to run through the grass to check for rocks, I probably would have taken my shoes off and run with you. But the fact that she interpreted it as that, she kept telling people this story about how great it was that I did that. And after we got the shot, we both like soaked our feet in warm water together, and it was like a good bonding moment. But that's just, to me, like seeing how much she appreciated that, it made me even more aware of like being on top of those kinds of things. Like when you're asking actors to do things that might be uncomfortable or it's something they wouldn't choose to do, make sure it like needs to happen because of the story, right? But also be willing to do it yourself, maybe, you know, and like really kind of lead by example, which I think plays into as well like the stuff we talked about in Red Flags, like leading with positivity and like making sure people feel heard and aren't, you know, Joss Whedon on set.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. And for me, like what I want people to take away from my sets is not like, wow, her vision was so good. Like I loved the shots we got. Like I don't care. Like, I care, but that's something that's so far abstracted from what we're actually doing on set that, like, I'm not interested in that. What I want is when people walk away and feel like it's a place they want to go back to, you know? And I feel the same way. Like, my approach to directing is very much like my approach to teaching, which is, like, I have a thing in mind that we're trying to accomplish, and ideally everyone is roughly on the same page, but I'm not really concerned with the results so much as I am concerned with, does everybody feel like this is a space they can be weird in, you know? Especially when you're doing comedy or romantic things, it's like, it's always going to be weird to do it on camera, you know? It's always going to feel dishonest to like smile really brightly into the camera, you know, like acting is so weird. It's so weird. And I want to make sure that like I validate like, hey, I know this feels weird, or I know it looks like you're not looking at them, but I'm telling you like it's true. Like I just want them to trust me. Like that's ultimately what I want from cast and crew alike, is I want them to trust me, and not just like, just trust me, I've got this, but I mean like really trust me. Like if I am telling them it looked great, I need them to believe me. And if I have not provided a set where they feel like they can believe me about, you know, hey, we need to run that one more time, it was almost perfect, but we need to like shift camera slightly, or if it's, we've got it, I promise you we've got it, we can move on. Like if I don't have that trust, then it doesn't matter how perfect the end result is. Like something has gone awry that goes deeper, and I don't want to deal with that. You know, I want to make sure that we fix that right away.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I figure we could end, because we're once again at our hour and a half mark. I figure we could end with like any final sort of worst directing behavior, red flags that either we've done or seen other people done, just to make sure we're all on the same page about what not to do. And then really quickly maybe just go through like our influences and favorite directors.
Sure.
So I feel like we've talked about most of the worst directing behaviors sort of already. like line readings is a really big thing. There'll be a whole article about that in our bonus Substack content. We've also talked about auteurism, like the iron fist of it is my vision and you're all just here to execute it for me, the special one.
Yeah, doesn't exist. It's never existed. And people that try to make it exist are usually the worst people ever. So.
Yes, 100%. I also said that something I wrote down was answering too many questions. I've seen a lot of, again, especially writer-directors, get really bogged down in like being right. And so having an answer to every single question that both specifically the actors ask, but also to an extent cast and crew, like I think that's a mistake because it inherently puts you in the position of like there's no autonomy on the parts of your, especially performers. They don't feel like they can make any choices unless they confirm it with you first. And I think it makes them feel more detached from the performance. So, this is also a teaching trick I have, which is sometimes a student will ask me a question and I'll say, well, what do you think? And I'm not doing it in like, this is a lesson, but it's like I want you to try to answer this question because I'm personally interested in your thought process in the attempt to answer it, because I still might answer your question if I feel like I need to, but until I understand how you're coming into this, why you're asking me, and if I wasn't here, what conclusion you'd come to, it's going to be hard for us to like move forward in a way that you have the like ownership over the answer to execute properly.
Yeah, I agree with that, because you're told so much that you have to sort of like make sure everything's aligning with the big picture. You feel like you have to have all the answers always, and that you like look bad if you don't have an answer, or if you don't answer a question. And really it's more strategic than that. It's like making sure that people feel like they have a sense of ownership. And yeah, what do you think? I think is the best way to answer something. Sometimes you do want to answer.
Oh, totally. Sometimes it's like, yeah, we need to move that light,
Right,
or like,
right.
oh, this is the, it's not like being the maddeningly, I don't know, what do you think person,
Right.
but it's about finding those moments where they're looking for an easy way out, but you need them to
Right.
do the harder introspective work because it will make what they're about to do better.
Right. That's why I also think like I have this friend who is a director, but I've been on a few sets with him and he like never really gives direction on the day of, and I think it's because he's like nervous about talking to actors. And one of the actors told me that she got a script from him that had every single line under it would say like what their intentions were, so like what the intention behind the line was, and or their motivation or whatever, and what the subtext was. And she was like, I felt like he had done my job for me and there wasn't any room for me to like
that's weird.
find on my own. And I was like, yeah, that's very very unusual, and it feels like he's just like unsure of how to give direction or how to collaborate, and so he's just trying to like make sure he gets what he thinks he wants, but he's like taking your agency from you and your craft from you, really. And so I think it's also like you can anticipate too many questions and preemptively answer them and end up sort of making people feel like, well, what's the point then, But yeah, that was, because like as someone who loves to talk about backstory, like I want you to tell me too. Like I want it to be a conversation and like let's find it together. I'm not gonna like send you a full like history of this person and like go through the script and be like, here's what they mean here and what they're feeling here, and like
here's their family tree.
Yes.
Their grandfather died in 1954.
Right.
And then the only other thing that I just had thought of is not validating good choices, because and this is something that I've had to learn in many parts of my life over the course of my life, is that I assume that if I'm put in a position where I need to critique something or make changes or whatever, if I don't say something, that means it was good. And I just don't have to say anything. So, assume that silence is compliance. If I'm silent on it, it means it was great, or it was fine. But I've learned that is not generally how people prefer to be communicated with when they're making themselves vulnerable. So
Yes.
Something that I have had to learn and like sometimes have to like make an active effort to do is not just jump right into like, okay, these are the 3 things that need to change about this scene in our next take, but also have at least 1 or 2 moments where I'm like, that was really good, but like give a specific. Like I don't want to just be the person who's like, that was great, so here's the things that need to be worked on. I want to be like, I really liked your delivery of this line. Really great stuff. I love the energy. Keep that in the next scene. And then for changes, like I try to make sure that I have at least 1 concrete like validation. and affirmation before I go into like notes. Otherwise, it can feel like the only time I talk to them is to critique. And I don't think that that sets anybody up for success. And I don't think that that makes people feel like safe.
Yeah, like I told that story in first episodes about Emma when we were shooting Summit and how like she was brilliant and I just assumed she knew she was brilliant. So I just like, only gave notes to the people that needed work. And then she was like crying by the end of the day, telling me that she like didn't feel, you know, appreciated. And so since then, 100% what you just said, I really try to make sure that I'm on top of letting people know that I am happy with what they're doing and appreciate it, and that it isn't just like these are the adjustments to make, but also what is working.
Yeah, and to be clear, I don't think that that's coddling, and I don't think like actors who request that specifically are being divas. Like I they're right. You know, like, you know, when people read my scripts, I like when they tell me what they like specifically. Like, I don't need them to, you know, give a personal check of approval on every single line of dialogue that they like. But for God's sake, tell me what was good about it, because, you know, it's a very vulnerable thing that we're all doing. So you can toss a compliment here or there. It's not going to slow down your day that much. Yeah. This is a note for me specifically. Influences. So just like, for people who want to watch stuff after this that is not just ours, but work from directors that we admire, Christina, who do you consider some of your influences?
So John Carpenter is a big one for me in terms of building tension and also sort of his use of like foreground and background. And if I were to recommend any one particular film, The Thing is one of my favorite movies ever, so I really recommend that. And another one that we have in common is Edgar Wright, for sure. Like pacing, comedic timing, just like editing.
Visual comedy is one of my big things with Edgar Wright. Yeah, I love the way that like every choice is intentional. Remember your intentions. But like for real, like every set piece is intentional. Every movement of a character feels like very both natural, but also like the perfect piece of a puzzle. Like, I mean, Baby Driver, I have thoughts on, but like as a feat of directing, it was very impressive.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah. I'm sure you and I will have an off-mic conversation about Baby Driver because I was so excited. And then, but like on a craft level, it was an incredible feat. And I think Scott Pilgrim in particular are two of my favorites of his, just because they're so colorful and there's so much going on, but it's so tightly put together. And I'm very curious what it's like to be on his set, because I wonder how tightly executed of a film that it turns out to be looks on set. Like, I wonder if the actors feel confined, you know?
Right.
I would be really curious to hear about what it's literally like on set, because like the end result is beautiful, but I wonder if the set is all that fun to be on, or if it very much feels like you're a gear in the machine.
Right. It's interesting because he's someone who I always think is a good director, and like I appreciate his directing choices, but as far as his movies that I actually love, they're written by Simon Pegg. So like it's like writing is king when it comes to like the story and really resonating, but like from a purely directing standpoint, his movies are always good, you know?
Yeah, totally. And then I just wanted to throw out Amy Sherman Palladino, who like she directs like she writes, which I like both of. Content, again, we can have a longer conversation about, but like she's somebody who really appreciates long takes and letting actors shine. And she also, I know from like reading interviews and with other actors and like with her, I know she tends to be very word perfect in her directing, which I'm not. I'm fine even as the writer of a lot of my pieces. I'm fine when actors deviate if it feels more natural. As long as the you know, cadence remains in play, as long as like the spirit of the line is still there, I'm not going to care if you drop the "and." You know what I mean?
Yeah, same. I mean, if it's a joke and like changing the word changes the joke, then that's an exception. Right. But otherwise, yeah, totally.
Or if like they drop a part of the line that logically sets up something. And so like that's not just like missing the cue line for the next actor, but it's also like, wait, you didn't actually explain why you're mad. You know, like
Yeah.
you drop the one really important thing. Like that, of course, I'll make a mention of. But yeah, I'm not going to be word perfect. But I really do like Amy Sherman-Palladino's long takes. I think Mrs. Maisel in particular is really fun to watch because they have set pieces that span the entire apartment. They're not just like a corner of a set, which really allows the camera to get to move around and follow actors around. And like it feels very alive. I like how alive her frames feel. And then I also wanted to give a shout out to Yulin Kwong, who's an indie director, but who's getting more and more notoriety. In particular, her short film I Ship It and Angie and Zara are two of my favorites. I think she's kind of Edgar Wrightian in that she's got a lot of like fun, bright colors and movements and like match cuts and things like that. But she also is just like, she's very character driven as well. And she lets actors have their moment. And I really like the way that she works. I actually interviewed her about directing on my other podcast, Forget the Box. So that was a really fun thing to get to do, is talk to her about craft. And then I also just wanted to give a shout out to Kathy Yan because I rewatched Harley Quinn Birds of Prey the other day. And Birds of Prey is so fucking fun to watch because she lets specifically female characters be kind of grotesque in a way that you rarely get to see on film. And it just makes all of the choices more interesting. And then, of course, just the way that she directs action is so intense. Like Harley Quinn in the police station, that entire sequence, start to finish, is just so fun to watch on every level.
I just want to say one little thing, not related to your recommendations, but a quote that I really like that I recently saw by the director Mira Nair, who, if you don't know her, she directed Salam Bombay, Mississippi Masala, Monsoon Wedding, The Queen of Katwe. And I would say she's one of my favorite directors, even though like there's nothing in common with what we direct. But a quote that I saw that I just really liked and I thought would be good for this episode, she said that directors need to have the heart of a poet but the skin of an elephant. And so they have to have like tenacity and to have thick skin, but that they can't just have that. They also have to be able to be vulnerable and to have sort of the spirit of a dreamer who can transport the audience and like believe that they can transport the audience. And I thought that was a really lovely kind of summation of what it means to be a director and what you have, the qualities you have to be a director, a good director.
I love that. That's a great one to go out on.
Cool. All right. Thanks so much to Kelsey Rauber for our theme music, Kaylee Brown for our podcast art, Ezra Lee for editing this episode, and to all of you for listening. Links to learn more about them are in our episode description. And thank you to our Booby VIPs who are $10 patrons on Patreon: Shannon Sprangler, Jules Piggott, Rain Bernal, Kelsey Rauber, Jerry Maravilla, Norman Steinberg, and Shayna Rose Woolley.
If you would like a name shout out at the end of every episode, please feel free to subscribe at patreon.com/breakingoutpod.
Which this time will almost certainly have like our episode notes because there's truly so much that we didn't even get a chance to get to. So definitely keep asking us your directing questions. I love talking about directing with Christina. I would love to do this again. And also make sure to rate us 5 stars on your favorite podcast app if you haven't already. And please remember that actually writing a review makes a big difference and we love reading them. So please keep sending those in. We really enjoy seeing what you have to say. All the validating things. Remember, you got to validate good choices. So validate our good choice of making this podcast. Next episode, we will be covering distribution for shorts and web series. So if that is something that's interesting to you and you're wondering what the hell do I do with this thing I just made now that I know all about directing from this episode, well, don't you worry. We've got you covered. So we'll see you next week. Nope, not next week. Whatever. Goodbye.